we can move towards a better, safer, and more interconnected world. I'm PJ Kwong, and in today's SGS Live, we're going to be talking about understanding renewable fuels and the role of ASTM D6866 testing. As global energy markets shift towards sustainability, understanding renewable fuel classifications and testing requirements is more important than ever. This SGS webinar will clarify the differences between biofuels and renewable fuels, highlight emerging market and regulatory trends, and explain how ASTM D6866 testing plays a key role in verifying biogenic carbon content. Our technical experts will also discuss the financial and environmental impact of renewable fuel certification, share real-world SGS collaborations, and outline how to send samples for analysis through SGS Beta and SGS Vallejo laboratories. Whether you're a producer, regulator, or sustainability professional, this session will provide the insights needed to navigate the renewable fuels landscape with confidence. So, without further ado, I'm delighted to welcome a couple of experts, three actually, for this fascinating conversation. And I'm starting with Mindy Villalba, Industries and Environmental Business Development Manager for OCM, or Oil Condition Monitoring. Welcome, Wendy. What a mouthful.
Yes, hi. Thanks for having me.
Terrific. Next up, I'd like to welcome our second guest, Haley Gershon, who is the marketing manager for Beta Labs and which is an SGS acquisition. Welcome, Haley.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Glad to have you. And finally, last but not least, Policy Research Associate at SGS Beta, Benjamin Kling. Welcome, Benjamin.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Terrific. Okay, we're going to get started. And Mindy, first up with you. How do renewable fuels differ from traditional biodiesel in terms of production, composition, and performance characteristics?
Yeah, thanks, PJ. So the idea behind these renewable sources is that they're both actually designed to be blended with traditional petroleum diesel. They do this for a variety of reasons. You have performance and operational enhancements, as well as economic incentives and regulatory requirements. However, you'd be surprised that these fuel sources are not similar at all. Although biodiesel and renewable diesels, they can start with the same feedstocks, their conversion processes into fuels are much different. Biodiesel is produced through transesterification of various materials, which results in fatty acid methyl esters, which is why we sometimes refer to them as FAME. And as it suggests, there are many feedstocks that can kickstart the production process, such as cooking oils, animal fats, soybean oil, corn oil, and other wastes and residues. Now, renewable fuels, renewable diesels, they can start with the same feedstocks. However, their conversion process into fuel is a little bit different. It's used by you hydrotreat, you hydrocrack, the isomerization process. This is all similar to petroleum refining. And this process completely removes oxygen, and it produces hydrocarbon fuels that are very chemically similar to ultra-low sulfur diesels. So, in terms of composition, you've got biodiesels that contain oxygen and are composed of methyl esters. Renewable diesels, they contain no oxygen, and they're made of straight chain isoparaffinic hydrocarbons, which are nearly identical to ultra-low sulfur diesels. And as for performance, which I know we're going to get into a little bit more in just a minute, renewable diesel, they deliver superior cold flow properties. They have better oxidative stability, and they are fully fungible with petroleum diesel, which means that they can be used in any blend ratio, including 100% without engine modifications. Renewable diesels are also considered pipeline compatible fuel, while biodiesel is not.
You know, I gotta love the acronym FAME. I'm not gonna lie. So I'm gonna stay with you for the moment. I want to know about the key physical and chemical properties of renewable fuels that most influence engine performance and emissions. We talked about performance, you're right.
Yeah. I'd say that there are probably 6 main properties that have the greatest impact on engine performance and emission. First and foremost, I got to say a cetane number. A higher cetane number means that the engines are starting to burn the fuel faster and that they burn more cleanly. This reduces knocking in the engine, and it also makes the engine run a little bit more quieter. So renewable diesels, they naturally have a very high cetane number. This ignites quickly and they burn smoothly. This is every engine manufacturer's dream. Um, Next, I would say is density, energy content. This determines power output, fuel economy. The heavier the diesel or the heavier the fuel, the more energy it usually carries. So renewable diesel, though, it's a little lighter than ultra low sulfur diesel, so it can have slightly less energy content per gallon, and this might mean a small drop in its energy fuel economy. Uh, but cold flow properties, this is very critical for operability in cold climates and in cold weather, which, you guys up north, you're experiencing that right now, that's for sure. In cold weather, some fuels, they start to thicken, they form wax, and this literally means that a fuel could stop moving. And for cold flow properties such as cloud point or pour point, this will tell you how a fuel will behave in freezing temperatures. Because of that hydrotreating process in renewable diesels, these actually resist any type of waxing or thickening. So renewable diesels will literally outperform better in cold environments than either biodiesel or petroleum diesel. Those are great benefits. Another important property. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
No, please, please. When you mentioned cold flow, I thought, yeah, that's kind of where I am in Canada. Cold flow for
Yes,
sure.
we definitely want your engines to start. We want your vehicles to move. So this is definitely a super important property, especially right now in the wintertime. But another important property for protecting pumps and injectors from wearing out is lubricity. Biodiesel itself is very naturally lubricating because of that fame, your favorite word. Those are smooth and slippery molecules that are found within biodiesel. And although renewable diesel doesn't have as much lubricity characteristics, there's a couple things you can do. Even when you're blending biodiesel or renewable diesels, commercial fuels will put in additional additives to improve those performance properties, or you can take your renewable blend and add biodiesel. That's how you can improve some lubricity property that way. But the side effect of hydrotreating for the removal, the side effect of hydrotreating for those renewable diesels is that you remove the sulfur compounds. It's a problem for the lower lubricity. However, it's actually a really good thing for the removal of the sulfur compounds. You're doing a great service for removing those sulfur compounds. No sulfur content means fewer emissions and better protection for modern engine systems like the DFPs and SCR units that work with diesel exhaust fluids to clean exhaust. So, staying with the topic of emissions, renewable diesels contain very few aromatics. The heavy sooty components in fossil diesel, fewer aromatics mean less smoke, less soot, and overall cleaner combustion. So these are all positive trends that are driving our current markets.
It's interesting that you talk about trends, because this next question, I'm going to bring in Benjamin as well and continue with you, Mindy. So market trends are a very important consideration, not just in the US, but globally. So what are those trends that are currently driving the adoption of renewable fuels? Mindy, if you can please start, and Benjamin, please follow up.
Sure, absolutely. At a local level, states are offering big financial incentives for cleaner fuels, like renewable diesel and sustainable aviation fuels, or at SAFs. Ben will get into that a little bit more. But because of this, many traditional oil refineries, they're switching their parts of operations to make room for these renewable fuels. We're seeing a lot of large transportation fleets like city buses, delivery trucks, and even transportation boats. They're switching to renewable diesel because it can be used immediately with their existing engines and fuel systems with absolutely no equipment changes needed. The airlines, they're facing strict climate goals, so they're rapidly investing in sustainable aviation fuel to cut emissions in a way that works with today's aircraft now. That's the problem, that everything has to happen now. Renewable, sustainable aviation fuel, they work like regular fuels when it comes to storage, transportation, and distribution. This means that fuel companies, they don't have to build new pipelines or tanks to integrate it into existing networks, unlike they did with biodiesel and ethanol. So overall, I'd say that government rules, carbon reduction incentives, refinery upgrades, and the need for simple drop-in clean fuels, these are what's pushing for fast global growth of renewable fuels.
Okay, Benjamin, you're up.
Yeah, so that was a great answer. I think similar to what Mindy was saying, sort of the main driver in this space right now is policy and these regulatory programs. And there's two real things that they're doing. First, they're providing an economic incentive to produce those fuels. And then they're also providing that demand certainty, like Mindy talked about with the airlines and a lot of other companies that are looking to decarbonize. A few major policies that are really driving the space in the United States, the main one to think about is the EPA's Renewable Fuel Standard, the RFS program. So it's a government program that provides tax incentives to these fuel producers on a volume basis. So for the amount of volumes that are brought to market, they produce renewable identification numbers or RIN tax credits tied to that production. The other sort of main type of regulation in this space is based on carbon intensity reduction. So those are programs that are going to credit the difference between these renewable fuels and the emissions that would come from traditional fossil fuels. At the US state level, there are low carbon fuel standard programs, LCFS, and you'll see those in a few states on the West Coast right now. California is the most famous one, and they sort of started it. And then Oregon and Washington have implemented those as well. And again, those are providing credits based on the carbon intensity reduction compared to a traditional fuel. That same model is used in Canada for their clean fuel regulation and also in the European Union for their renewable energy directive. So whereas the RFS is sort of boosting the entire industry by providing those credits per volume, these are all really targeting how much can these fuels reduce the carbon intensity and drive those emission reductions. The other thing to look at is a lot of new and proposed programs that we'll talk about later on as well, but more states in the US are considering low carbon fuel standard programs, and also around the world there are a lot more regulations popping up to drive the industry's growth around the world.
You know, it's interesting. You mentioned some of these regulatory bodies, and I'm kind of curious about the ones in NAM and also internationally. How are they shaping the fuel landscape, and what major upcoming regulations should stakeholders be aware of?
Yeah, so as a result of their influence on the space, these regulatory bodies are playing a really big role in the industry. A few rules to watch, starting with the United States right now, is the EPA Set 2 rule for the RFS program. So basically, like I said, the renewable fuel standard, they're procuring a certain amount of biofuels by volume that those tax credits will be available for. And they set how many volumes they're going to do ahead of time so industry knows what will be available. So this year, they proposed the highest volumes in the history of that program. And that's really important because in the United States, our industry's actually been producing well below their capacity for these renewable fuels because at a certain point, if they're not going to generate RINs, that incentive to put those volumes on the market isn't there. So if those volumes hold, it was a proposed rule that's being finalized now, that'll really give a green light to the industry to maximize their production and bring a lot more of these fuels to market. And actually, just yesterday, the U.S. Appeals Court in D.C. directed the EPA to give an update on that rule within the next 7 days. So keep an eye out because pretty soon we should get at least an update on when that final rule will come. And again, that'll really direct U.S. industry to maximize the volumes that they're putting out there. At the state level, I mentioned those LCFS programs. Earlier this year, New Mexico became the fourth state to pass a law for a state LCFS program. And they're currently developing rules. And it looks like early next year that program should be in place. And there are a lot of other states where traction is growing, where bills have either been introduced or are soon to be introduced. And like I talked about, these programs right now are on the West Coast and now in New Mexico. But we're going to start seeing those pop up in the Midwest, on the East Coast. So those will be really important, again, to drive that production at the state level. And then the other two parts of the market to watch, like Mindy mentioned before, sustainable aviation fuel. The idea of putting biofuels into aviation to help that industry decarbonize is going to be something we see more incentives for. And then maritime fuels, the same thing for shipping and cruise ships. The EU put mandates in place for both of these types of fuels starting this year, and they're going to scale up the industry's obligation to use those fuels over the coming years. And in the United States, we have some similar regulations where instead of mandating at the state level, we're giving SAF production credits. So states are going to give extra tax credits to sustainable aviation fuel producers in the state. And then there are also proposed bills at the federal level, first to expand the RFS to maritime fuels. So any fuels that go into ocean vessels will be eligible to generate RINs under the RFS if that passes. And there's also a new bill to reinstate a SAF premium credit, again, to give more of those federal tax credits to producers aiming at those two specific hard to decarbonize markets.
There is a lot to consider. That's very clear. So just for fun, I wanted to get our audience involved at this point and a little bit of trivia. So I have a question for our audience. I want you to put your answer in the chat window below. We'll see if you have this all figured out. I know I do. Of course, I wrote the question. That's probably why. Okay. Here is the question. Which of these is not a key difference between renewable and biodiesel fuels? There are three possibilities for answers. Number one is volume. Number two is stability and cold flow properties. Or number three, performance characteristics. So which of these is not a key difference between renewable and biodiesel fuels? Number one, volume. Number two, stability and cold flow properties. Or number three, performance characteristics. Okay, Mindy, Haley, and Benjamin, you're not allowed to play because you already know the answer. But for the audience, put your answers in the chat window below. And I've got a PJ question before we get to the answers that the audience thought, and before I reveal the correct answer. So I always thought that perhaps these two terms were interchangeable when we're talking about renewable fuels and when we're talking about biodiesel fuels. Like, where have I gone wrong? Mindy, maybe you could help me out.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of what we're talking about with the credits and stuff, I mean, yes, you get incentives for using them, you get incentives for blending them. At the end of the day, they were designed to be used in conventional diesel. You're allowed to blend them. They're supposed to look the same. We have ASTM methods, that allow you to test them as one unit. It's not supposed to look any different than the fuel that you put in your vehicle. That's the idea. So you may not know what you have. That's the goal. So the idea is that your end user is not supposed to necessarily know that you have a biodiesel blend or a renewable source blend. That's for you and the government to know. So that you can get your money's worth, your tax credits later. But your end user isn't supposed to know. It's supposed to operate exactly the same. So that's the idea behind it. Will you know if you do some testing behind the fuel? Yeah, that's where the property and the performance characteristics come into play. That you might know. You would know a little bit more about what your sources would be if you did some testing. And we'll get into a little bit of that later. But should it operate the same? Would you see some of the same data? Yeah, that's the goal. that's the whole reason you're supposed to be able to use it. That's the goal, right?
Amazing. So I'm going to ask the question one more time, and then we're going to take a look and see what our audience had to say. So the question was, which of these is not a key difference between renewable and biodiesel fuels? The answers were number one, volume, number two, stability and cold flow properties, or number three, performance and characteristics. Let's reveal some of our audience responses. Number two. Oh my goodness, lots of number twos. Oh, number two. Okay. I'm sorry to tell you, all of you people with number twos, you do not win the prize because the correct answer is number one. Volume is the answer. So better luck next time. But thank you for playing along. That part is just great. And if you're just joining us, we're talking about understanding renewable fuels and the role of ASTM D6866 testing with my guests, Mindy Villalba, Benjamin Kling, and Haley Gershon from SGS. So we're going to get back to our conversation. And Benjamin, I'm going to stick with you. What is the financial impact of biogenic carbon content on producers, refiners, and end users, particularly regarding credits, incentives, or compliance costs? All about the money.
Yeah, so testing for biogenic carbon is going to have really significant benefits compared to relatively very low cost. So starting with all those regulations we just talked about. Test results make your fuels eligible for those regulations. And so that can be a difference of millions of dollars of tax credits that can either be used directly by your company, or if, say, your tax bill isn't that large, you're a newer biofuels company, you can then sell those companies to other companies that need to comply with their emissions reductions. There are a couple other ways that testing can play an important role. One of them is in a refinery. So traditional petroleum refineries that are looking to introduce biofeedstocks to co-process and produce renewable fuels. Those biofeedstocks aren't going to behave the same way as traditional fossil ones would in your refinery. So we can test throughout your process and see where that biogenic carbon is ending up in the outputs, and then help maximize the amount that goes into that highest value desired output. And that can really change the amount of credits that you're eligible to generate. And again, that can be a huge financial impact on the amount of credits that you end up either using for your own tax bill or having available to sell. Another really important aspect of this is the potential now to pair a biofuels refinery with BECCS, bioenergy carbon capture and storage, or bio-CDR, biogenic carbon dioxide removals. So in the same process, you're capturing your CO2, that's going to be biogenic CO2. And when that's removed, you're creating a negative removal. If a traditional fossil refinery captures their CO2, they're preventing petroleum from going into the atmosphere. But if you're capturing biogenic modern CO2 and sequestering that, that's a net negative removal. And so there are a lot of programs that are going to incentivize that. First, we talked early on about the difference between the RFS, which is going to credit volumes, as opposed to these other programs that credit carbon intensity reduction, like the LCFS programs, Canada and the EU. All of those programs, if you're pairing your refinery with carbon capture and sequestration, you're going to get a lot more credits in those programs because you're looking at a negative carbon intensity. But in the United States, at the federal level, where the RFS is crediting the volume, that puts no obligation on you to have your CCS part of that same program. So you can actually then sell those credits as removals on a separate market. So that opens up a whole new revenue stream that can be worth almost as much as the fuel side of your business. At the same time, when you capture that CO2, that can be sold as feedstock for either higher value chemicals or long-term products that would be sequestered in. It can be turned into biochar that would be applied back to the soil as a way to sequester. And then again, if you geologically sequester it, that's going to get you the maximum value in a lot of cases if you're just selling those CCS credits. So really, it opens up a new revenue stream if you're looking at these new types of projects. But also, if you're reducing your carbon intensity, if you're maximizing the biogenic carbon in your fuel, all of these can really be critical ways to improve a project's financial success.
Amazing. You know, Haley, in case you thought I was ignoring you and I would never ask you anything, now is your chance. I'd like to know, how does C14 testing work, and what does it reveal about the biogenic versus fossil-derived portions of a fuel sample?
Yeah, so carbon-14 is a radioactive isotope of carbon. It's present in recently living materials or organisms. So at DEA, we use an accelerator mass spectrometer to analyze the amount of carbon-14 present in a given sample, and then we compare it to the amount of minor carbon present in the atmosphere. Carbon-14 is measured based on international standards, such as ISTM C6866, and this determines the percentage of biogenic content expressed as a fraction of total carbon for biofuels and fuel gases, for example. Our results provide a clear and easy to read pie chart that will indicate the percentage of biogenic carbon versus fossil carbon in a given sample.
You know, I just knew that our audience was going to be extremely interested in this topic, and we're going to have a quick look to see who has joined us. We always have the best global audiences for these JG conversations for SGS Live. Very, very interesting topic. I agree, Maria. And there are lots of people, I can see by the comments that there are tons of people who have joined us. And I want to say a big welcome to one and all. If you are just joining us, we are talking about ASTM D6866 testing and understanding renewable fuels. It's a very interesting conversation. And don't forget, we're going to have a Q&A at the end of this interview portion. And feel free to drop your questions and comments in the chat window below. And my guests are Vinny Villalba, Kling and Haley Gershon. Okay, everybody, we are back to our conversation. As I would have predicted, there's a lot of information that we are trying to get through and need to be disseminated on this topic. So here's my question, and it's for you once again, Haley. Why is determining biogenic content important for producers, regulators, and downstream users?
Studying biogenic content is valuable both upstream and downstream, but focusing on downstream specifically is important, especially for regulators, to understand the actual biomass-derived content in a fuel. Relying solely on calculations, for example, doesn't provide sufficient evidence. Carbon-14 biogenic testing allows producers and users and end users to verify the true blend that they're selling or purchasing, serving as a reliable quality assurance tool and ensuring that you're getting what you're paying for. For regulators, this analysis also reduces the risk of greenwashing by providing a precise, measurable percentage of biomass-derived content.
Okay, so I'm going to stick with you, Haley. I want to know about some real-world applications or case studies where SGS has collaborated with customers on renewable fuel testing or compliance solutions. What can you tell me?
So since we were acquired last year by SGS, we've collaborated with global SGS offices to really broaden access to carbon-14 testing across multiple sectors. Many of these joint efforts support regulatory compliance for programs like Benjamin mentioned earlier. This includes the US EPA RFS, the EU ETS, EU RED, and also state-level low-carbon fuel standards. On the research and development side, we've contributed to projects across the entire value chain. This includes feedstocks, intermediate, catalysts, emissions, fuel gases, and also finished fuels. And this helps teams to better understand biogenic content at each stage.
So, Haley, sticking with you, what types of materials can be classified as renewable fuel feedstocks, and how do these material types affect processing and quality?
Yeah, so we look at feedstocks in terms of their bio-based or biogenic content. If they consist of a biomass-derived source, for example, then that is considered biogenic. We've seen various feedstocks from corn to sugar, different waste streams as well, and used cooking oils, for example. So there's plenty of different feedstocks that we're able to analyze.
Okay, friends, I have a final question before we get into our Q&A. And if you want into our Q&A, leave any questions or comments in the chat window below. If we can't get to you in the Q&A, then somebody will follow up with you after this live. And we also have a way that you can be in contact with all of our guests. And that is, let's just take a quick look at the website. Okay, there it is, betalabservices.com. If people want more information from any of you, that's where they can check out first. Okay, here is this final question, and it's for you, Mindy, and for you, Haley. What testing challenges arise when you're working with renewable fuels or mixed material blends, and how does SGS address those challenges? So, Haley, you go first this time, and then Mindy, if you can please follow up.
Yeah, one of the main practical challenges that we encounter at the lab is sample size. Beta's carbon-14 analysis requires only about 1 milliliter per sample, so we often need to remind clients to submit small sample volumes rather than large containers. We do also address occasional questions about detection limits and error margins. The ISTM 866 method specifies an absolute uncertainty of plus or minus 3%, although our instrumentation and analytical process can consistently achieve higher precision. So in terms of detection capability, the accelerator mass spectrometer can measure down to 0.44% modern carbon, or PMC, and this allows us to detect even extremely small amounts of biogenic carbon.
Mindy, what can you share?
Yeah, no, that's great information, Haley. Thanks. But
Yeah.
I did want to add that for anyone planning to use this method, 6866, on stored fuel samples that may contain both biodiesel and renewable diesel, this method will only give you one number, and that's the total biogenic carbon percentage that's in the fuel sample. Because biodiesel and renewable diesel are each considered 100% biogenic, and petroleum diesel is 0% biogenic, the biogenic carbon result that you get is simply the combined amount of biodiesel plus renewable biodiesel in that sample. So ASTM D6866 cannot tell you how much of that renewable portion is biodiesel versus renewable diesel. So if you need that level of detail, we can use established methods that specifically measure the FAME content, which is that biodiesel portion in the fuel. Once we know the biodiesel percentage, we can then pair that information with the D6866 results, calculate how much renewable percent is in that sample that may contain multiple sources.
You know, I am just astonished at how quickly this whole interview is just flying by. And if you're just joining us, I'm speaking with my SGS experts, Mindy Villalba, Benjamin Kling, and Haley Gershon, and we're talking about understanding renewable fuels and the role of ASTM D6866 testing in this edition of Changing Conversations on SGS Live. Don't forget, we're starting our Q&A right now, and if you want in, just leave your questions or comments in the chat box below, and if we don't get to them right now, then somebody will follow up with you after this live session. Okay, this first question is going to be from Mindy and Haley again. What information should clients provide when preparing to send renewable fuel samples to SGS Beta or SGS Vallejo to ensure the most efficient turnaround? Mindy, let's have you go first.
Yeah, sure. I can tell you what I need. It's pretty easy from my standpoint. I want to know what you want to know. A large amount of the field testing that's done at our oil condition monitoring or the OCM locations is related to the end users. Excuse me. But unfortunately, it's not always easy for them to know what they need to know for those issues where problems have occurred. That's a much easier question to answer when it's either regulatory driven or quality driven. Either way, our team at the ocm.info at sgs.com, they can get you on the right testing track.
Perfect. Haley, what can you add?
Yeah, feeding off of what Mindy mentioned, we recommend first getting in touch with our team. That would be our general email, info@betalabservices.com. And then by doing that, your inquiry will be sent to one of our dedicated account managers who will work with you throughout the entire project. You can meet with our team to discuss project details, including timeline, number of samples you plan to submit, duration of your project, regulatory requirements, and so on. We have an online submission form that must be filled out prior to shipping samples to our lab. And for most fuel projects, we get results back within 4 to 7 business days, but for some projects working more with fuel gases, the standard turnaround time there is about 30 days.
Okay, so I got another question. That is, how can laboratories and producers build stronger partnerships to support the rapid growth of renewable fuels and evolving testing needs? This again is going to be for both of you. Mindy, I'm going to have you start, and Haley, again, if you could follow up. Mindy,
Yep.
can you?
One of the most important ways that our laboratories, yeah, again, one of the most important ways that our laboratories and producers can build stronger partnerships is by making sure that we're working together proactively and not reactively. As renewable fuel production grows and blend profiles become more complex, as Haley mentioned before, producers need testing partners that can respond quickly, understand those evolving specifications, and help troubleshoot the quality and contamination issues before they become costly problems. Benjamin mentioned that you've got some great solutions that you can go into the refineries and do that response on. So this is where SGS can really add that kind of value. We're a global resource for fuel quality testing, contamination diagnostics, and regulatory compliance. We support clients using ASTM D975 as a foundation for ULSD blends, whether those blends include biodiesel, renewable diesel, or multiple renewable sources. And because we offer both traditional fuel property testing and specialized methods such as the ASTM D6866, SGS can support the rapid growth of renewable fuels while giving our clients confidence that their products meet both performance and compliance expectations.
Excuse me, amazing. Okay, I've got time for 2 more questions. This next one is kind of a quick question. Benjamin, can you tell me, please, how frequently testing is required for regulations?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's going to depend on first the fuel type and obviously which regulation they're interested in. The most common timeline is quarterly. So if you're co-processing fuels, renewable diesel for the US RFS, that's going to be quarterly. If you're producing renewable natural gas, which is produced from biogas, that's once a year. And then for Canada's clean fuel regulation and the EU RED, those are quarterly for both types of fuels as well. I'd say in general, if you have a question about it, reach out to us with what your fuel type is and what sort of regulations you're interested in, and we can give you sort of those detailed timelines.
Amazing. Okay, it's down to my final question, and it's for all of you. What one thing would you like, would each of you like to see clients prioritize with their testing needs? Haley, I'm going to get you to start, then Mindy, and then Benjamin, the final word will go to you.
Yeah, we see proactive communication with the testing lab as being extremely essential. So rather than waiting until the end of a regulatory period, I recommend reaching out early to understand our testing process, in addition to our sample size needs, preparation requirements, and also to prepare for any regulatory deadlines. We have a global team of account managers located across North America, Latin America, Europe, and Asia, and they're always happy to walk you through project requirements and timelines to help ensure everything stays on track.
Terrific. Communication, that's one. Okay, Mindy.
I agree with Haley. Timelines, and Ben said the same thing. Timelines are definitely key for success, but also important is sample quality, proper preparation when sending in the samples for testing, as this directly affects and impacts the accuracy and reliability of the results. So before submission, please ensure that the sample is properly collected, free of contamination, in the correct container, and clearly labeled with all of the necessary details.
Benjamin, did they leave you with anything?
Absolutely. I think those are all really important things to think about ahead of time as you're getting ready. And then the other thing is, sometimes you do your test and it's once a quarter, once a year, and then you sort of forget about it. But like we've talked about, all of these regulations are changing really frequently. We're getting sort of new rules that come out and get changed. So I'd say stay engaged, keep an eye out, because we'll do our best to sort of keep everyone up to date on what these different changes mean and what it might affect your testing.
Such great information, everybody, but I'm going to have to stop it here. We are out of time. So to our audience, I'd like to thank you for joining us for this fascinating conversation on changing conversations for SGS Live. And I want to thank my guests, Mindy Villalba, Benjamin Kling, and Haley Gershon. You were fantastic. We've been talking about understanding renewable fuels and the role of AI 6866. So don't forget, if you want more information, you can go to the website, which is located at www.betalabs, I think. Let's just take a look. There it is, betalabservices.com. And then there's also an email address that you can access if you're looking for more information from Mindy, Benjamin, or Haley. And that email address is ocm.info@sgs.com. As I said, a great session today. Thank you so much for joining us. And we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. I'm PJ Kwong. Bye for now.